All right, so we hear so much about the share market and the property market in our daily news doses, but when it comes to our financial well-being, the market which is probably the most important to us is the labour market, because after all, our jobs are what pay the bills. So joining us to discuss the latest developments in this space is Callam Pickering, Senior Economist at Indeed. Callam, thanks for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar.
G'day, boys. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for joining us, Callam. So over the past, 6 to 12 months, there's been a lot of talk. It's kind of died off a bit recently about the so-called Great Resignation / the jobs hiring boom. What have you seen at Indeed so far? Is this coming to an end, or was this even a real thing to start with?
The Great Resignation. There was probably a good 12 months there where I think every time I spoke to clients, and I talked to a lot of businesses and recruiters as part of my job, all they wanted to know about was the Great Resignation. Was it a thing? Was it happening? What did it mean for them? And the truth was, we looked through our data all the time, and it was really hard to identify in Australia. We get real-time data on employer and job seeker behaviour. We couldn't see it. Job seekers weren't doing anything unusual, at least with regards to the Indeed website. Now, that was a little while ago. Obviously, today we have a little bit more information around what the Great Resignation actually looks like. The ABS has a range of data that's come out as well. And the truth is it hasn't really been a thing. Job mobility has picked up a little bit over the past year. About 9.5% of Australian workers changed jobs over the past year, which is the highest since 2012. Now, at first glance, you think that's a bit of a tick in favour of the Great Resignation, but the reality is job mobility today is well below what it was in, say, the first decade of this century. From 2000 to 2010, it averaged around 11 to 12% of the workforce changing jobs every year, compared to about 9.5% today. So what we've seen is really just a sort of mild pickup in job mobility rather than any sort of sizable change in behaviour. Now, all that said, while the Great Resignation absolutely wasn't a thing, the jobs boom obviously was. Almost every labour market metric we have is doing things we haven't seen before or haven't seen in a long time. We've seen extraordinary employment growth over the past couple of years. We've seen amazing job creation. And certainly there's a lot more jobs out there today unfilled than there was before the pandemic began or at any point in Australia's recent economic history. So, the jobs boom, absolutely massive. Great Resignation, not really a thing.
That's interesting because, I remember just a short while ago, it seemed like every other person was posting about the Great Resignation on LinkedIn. It provided a lot of content fodder there, people talking about that. But as for the current situation we're in, for a while it's felt like, the employees have all the power. It's an employees market. They can really pick and choose where they want to go. But I do just get the sense, just sort of seeing anecdotes from people mentioning that it seems like there's a bit of a slowdown, less contracts, less work available for certain businesses. Do you get the sense that this is gonna start turning soon? Like, could we see an unemployment rate, around the 4% mark by the end of this year?
We're certainly seeing a little bit of a shift. Now, I'd still argue that this is primarily still a job seekers market in terms of who has the most power, but the dynamic has certainly shifted compared to where it was last year or the year before that. The imbalance between demand and supply in the labour market has began to converge a little bit. And so there is this expectation that the unemployment rate is going to drift upwards a little bit over the remainder of the year. My expectations are a little bit boring. They do align a little bit with what the Reserve Bank of Australia is currently saying. They think the unemployment rate will get to around 4% by year end. I think will either be slightly below or slightly above that, which I think ultimately is a pretty good result given how challenging the economic environment has been. The fact that the jobs market has proven to be so resilient is just a really good sign about how well we've absorbed the impact of this high inflation environment, the increase in interest rates as well. So it's only natural that the labour market is going to slow down, but it's slowing down from a really strong position. We've seen things like, job postings on Indeed have come down about a quarter from their peak, but they're still well above pre-pandemic levels. So they're still really healthy numbers, albeit not quite as strong as they were 12 months ago. So I think if we can keep the unemployment rate at around 4% by the end of the year, I think we should be really happy with that.
Sure, and we'll move slightly now to the whole immigration sort of thing that's happening right now. There's supposedly 300,000 to 400,000 people arriving in Australia this year. Coming off the back of pretty much no one arriving on any real basis in the pandemic. So are these people filling jobs that need to be filled? Like I've noticed anecdotally, every shop window has a job posting, job vacancy sign, but maybe a lot of the immigration seems to be skilled and skilled labor. So, maybe not so many job postings there where, the jobs that everyone wants aren't really there. So what have you noticed with Indeed? Are immigrants filling the jobs that need to be filled, or is it a bit different?
Yeah, so with regards to this, I think it's worth mentioning that the skill and talent shortages that have emerged over the past couple of years have been widespread. They apply to basically every industry and every occupation. So there's been a real need for people across the board. Historically, when we thought about skill shortages, we thought about sectors such as tech and engineering and healthcare. But today, it's a very different dynamic. And so it's actually really difficult for immigrants or new immigrants to not be filling some sort of role where there is a significant shortage, no matter what industry they go to. So that's very different today compared to a few years ago. There is obviously still a really strong skill component to it. The federal government does target that, and so they're pretty consistently looking for healthcare talent and tech talent and engineering talent, and that's always a big part of what the immigration system looks like with regards to workers coming to Australia. But the sheer number of people who are coming in at the moment does mean that we are filling a lot more, a lot of very different roles. We're also seeing a lot of workers coming into sectors such as retail and hospitality, backpackers coming to Australia and they're working while they're here and things like that. And it's not fully addressing the skill shortages, not by a long shot, but it's certainly helping recruiters find it just a little bit easier to find talent. And obviously, at the moment, the economy is creating enough jobs where we can absorb that immigration intake. And so there really hasn't been much downside to, so many people coming into the country at the moment because the jobs are there and they need to be filled.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something about productivity. We keep hearing in the media a lot at the moment that they keep saying that labour productivity is dropping quite drastically. What's that a symptom of? Is it wages going up, or is it the fact that it's a job seekers market? Maybe people feel less inclined to work so hard in their jobs, or is it something else entirely? Is it we keep hearing about the whole working from home revolution, actually. People saying maybe more people working from home is hurting productivity. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's probably a few dynamics at play here that could be contributing to it. Working from home being one of them. It obviously works really well in certain industries and occupations. I've worked from home for the past 6 years, and I don't think it impacts my productivity at all. But it's likely to have had some impact upon other workers in other industries. And that's obviously been the real big shift in what the jobs market looks like today compared to a few years ago. So that could certainly be one reason why productivity has declined. Some people would say the fact that the unemployment rate is now so low could also be a reason. So we're bringing in perhaps some of the less productive workers, less productive marginal worker coming into the workforce, and maybe they're not performing at the same level as existing workers. So that could also be a factor. But the truth is, if it was easy to diagnose, it would be easy to fix. And there haven't been too many great ideas coming out from federal state governments around improving productivity growth in Australia. So that suggests that it's probably a pretty complicated thing that's going on that doesn't have any easy answers.
Sure. Like just personally, Dom and I are in the office at the moment and we just came back from a morning tea. So I can't say how productive that was, just chatting around eating cake for half an hour. But it's kind of interesting that you said that, with the strong unemployment rate, there's a lot, like there's some more or less productive workers coming in, being able to find a job. It's kind of interesting how such a strong figure, 3.5%, 3.7% can kind of be a bit of a negative in that regard. And it's kind of like how everyone interprets the data.
It is an interesting one. I feel bad sort of talking about the least productive or workers in society coming in and that being a bad thing. But, it is a possibility. One thing I'd also touch upon with regards to productivity is that most businesses have been dealing with, considerable staff shortages over the past couple of years. And what that can do is create some sort of dysfunction in the way businesses operate, which can also impact productivity as well.
So is there a fix for that? Like, is there a light at the end of the tunnel around all this data? Like the RBA says, to return to a non-inflationary rate of employment, it's up to 4.5%. Is there kind of a fix to this productivity? Is there a way to have strong jobs figures while also having other areas that are healthy in the labour market?
Look, I think it's something that the imbalances will diminish over time, but there's no real silver bullet there. You can't fix it overnight, which is unfortunate. It's going to be something that's going to slowly diminish over a number of years, and we'll look back from the vantage point of 2025 or 2026, and the labour market will begin to look like something that resembled what it was before the pandemic began. And so you won't have these widespread skill shortages. You won't have jobs going unfilled for 6 months, 12 months, and businesses will start to operate the way they should, versus the current situation where there's just too many roles that aren't being filled for very long periods of time, making it difficult for them to operate at full capacity and operate the way they should.
And Callam, just finally, what's your outlook on wages growth? Obviously, a lot of employees would like to see that remaining strong. But while it might be strong, the actual number itself, it's when you look at real wages growth, it's been negative, and people's wages have been falling behind the rising cost of living. So, it was one of those things that the RBA seemed a bit worried that wages growth will rise pretty strong and bake in these high rates of inflation. Obviously, there were some people contesting that, the unions. Just give us your take really here. What's wages growth going to do in the next few months?
Well, I never thought I'd be complaining about annual wage growth of 3.6%, but here we are. That's what happens when inflation's clocking in at 6-7%. And inflation-adjusted wages have gone back to 13-year lows. Now, in terms of what I think is going to happen over, say, the next 6 months, over the remainder of the year, private sector wages annual private sector wages should increase to around 4%, maybe even slightly above that. Public sector wages continue to lag behind. They're struggling to push through the 3% level. They might go slightly higher, but not by much. So you're looking at a 4% private sector, maybe 3.1% public sector sort of dynamic. So that there are still some wage pressures out there. We saw in the June quarter that newly negotiated wages were up by 4.5%. So that was a big number. That's the biggest we've really seen since the global financial crisis began. So it does appear as though wage growth overall is going to continue to pick up over at least the next 6 months. And certainly while the labour market remains tight, in that 4% range, we wouldn't expect wage growth to soften too much. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how that plays out. The Reserve Bank is correct in being a little bit concerned about what wage growth could do next year, particularly as other sources of inflation come off. They're very concerned around service sector inflation, a key component of that being wage growth. And obviously right now, the wage growth that we are seeing is inconsistent with the productivity figures that we're seeing. So the wage gains aren't justified by productivity growth, which does mean that that can create problems for inflation. going forward. So it'll be an interesting dynamic that's going to play out over the next 12 months or so. We really do need to see that productivity figure begin to turn around so that we can justify these higher wage gains. And so that doesn't trigger higher inflation.
There we go. No silver bullet. Callam Pickering, thanks for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar podcast.
Thanks for having me on the program.
Cheers, Callam. Appreciate it. Thanks.
No worries.